The narrative of when you go up to the ballot box and you say, I'm voting for the person and not the party, that narrative, frankly, falls on its face. Matt Jenner, along with two other Conservatives, have crossed the floor to the Liberals, with significant backlash as a result. But that backlash isn't really just about politicians switching parties. It goes deeper than that. It touches on the value of a vote in Canada, what representation actually means, and what voters believe they're actually choosing when they mark a ballot. Some people argue, well, you vote for the person. But in Canada, it isn't that simple. Let's take a look. So after the recent floor crosser of Matt Jenner, we received lots of emails and we saw lots of feedback all over social media. So we wanted to go through some of the feedback that we saw on Facebook. Whatever keeps Pierre out works for me. I don't support a party, I support a person. It's an easy choice for me between the two. Another person says, you vote for the person that best represents what you want. That candidate that will work for his constituents, not the party they belong to. Someone else says, he didn't really cross the floor, he had resigned. Now he's joining the Liberals. And someone else says, psst, you're supposed to vote for a candidate, not a party. If a person is crossing party lines, they likely think it's what will represent their constituents the best. And if not, they deserve to lose the next election. But crying for a by-election is just silly babies. So, this is what a lot of people have said. And it's what a lot of people think. And if you think about it, sure, maybe it's reasonable. Maybe it's reasonable that you go to your ballot, you pick the person's name, you put it in the ballot box. Well, that's easy to say if you're on the team that's actually getting these candidates. Now, we've been pretty consistent. We don't agree with floor crossers from anywhere, which is why back in 2024, when we heard some rumblings of potential Liberals crossing the floor to go to the Conservatives, we were completely against that, just as we're completely against it now. And you also have some interesting scenarios where there are center-left Liberals, Liberal voters, who voted for the Liberals, and they don't like this either. They don't like this because they think it's actually attack on democracy, and they think that it sows more mistrust within our democratic system. And to all of those folks, I salute you, because that means we have some common ground. So let's look at this premise that in Canada, you vote for the person, not the party. Well, in order to answer whether or not that is A, reasonable, and B, true, we thought we'd take you on a little bit of a journey to some of the other parliamentary democracies in the Commonwealth, starting with our mother democracy, the UK. Believe it or not, our current parliament is the most rebellious yet. A combination of Twitter, rolling news, and coalition angst means the modern backbencher is far more likely to defy the whip. And if you look below the picture, at the subtitle, it says, since 2010, there have been rebellions by coalition politicians in 44% of votes. That's a lot. The article reads, the habit of rebellion has been growing for 20 years, accentuated by the tensions of coalition and the temptation to grandstand on 24/7 rolling news, Facebook, or Twitter. Since 2010, there have been coalition rebellions in 44% of parliamentary votes, Tory MPs breaking ranks in 28% of them, Liberal Democrats in 24%. And this is in the normally ultra-loyal first session of a newly elected government. So far, the biggest revolt remains the 25th of October in 2011, when 81 Tory MPs defied a 3-line whip to back an EU referendum. The biggest Lib Dem revolt, 21, was over tuition fees. More Tim colleagues abstained on both nights. Number one rebel so far? Step forward, Philip Hollobone, MP for Kettering, since 2005. He's an ex-banker, frugal self-publicist, and a supporter of the quote-unquote better off out, no prize for guessing of what, campaign. In total, no fewer than 153 coalition MPs, including 119 of the 305 Conservatives, have rebelled. Many were old lags of the Holloway tendency, but ominously many were new MPs, their parliamentary virginity hastily lost. So what does that essentially mean? Well, what that means is in the UK, it's fairly common for you to belong to a party, the party saying, this is what we're going to be voting for, and then when the vote comes, MPs rebel and vote against it. And that's happened on 44% of the votes since 2010. So that's a completely different ballgame in the UK, when you look at comparing it to Canada, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now, what do they mean by three-line whip and what is a whip anyway? So we've talked about this before. So a whip is a position in parties. It's even a position down in the United States where as you're getting ready for a vote, the whip goes around and makes sure that they understand who is going to be voting for what and that they have the votes that they need to actually pass a bill. So that could be in their own party, and they work with other whips and other parties to understand what's going on elsewhere in Parliament. So a three-line whip means everybody is voting for what the party says. No questions, no ifs, no ands, nor buts. Those are usually confidence votes or really, really high-profile, important votes that the party needs to win. So for somebody, never mind multiple people, to go against a three-line whip, that's significant. But in the UK, that just seems like everyday business, according to what we're seeing. Let's go over to another parliamentary democracy in New Zealand. Grubby Treaty Principles Bill voted down in the New Zealand Parliament. So what this article talks about is the fact that there's this governing party, which is called the National Party, and they're in a coalition with two other parties. And there was this bill that came up, and what ended up happening is the Prime Minister says, this is what we're voting for, but in the entire Parliament, only 11 votes were in favor of it. You can see in the article where it says here, but ACT is one of the parties, cut a lonely figure as National and New Zealand First MPs made good on their promises to vote against the bill alongside the opposition who stood and applauded after the vote. In the end, the vote was 11 in favor with 112 against. Afterwards, members of the public gallery and politicians from across the political divide sang a Maori song. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon was absent for the reading, leaving his Justice Minister Paul Goldsmith to speak on behalf of National. So you had a coalition between these three parties, and most of the coalition voted against the bill that was brought forward by the coalition. It's kind of crazy. Now we look at this. This is a graph of stats compiled over votes over many, many years, and this shows you how many of the votes were actually inclusive of rebellions, right? So you have the United Kingdom, 85 to 95%. So the rebellions are pretty common. And in Australia, 95 to 98%. So they're not that common, but they can still happen. New Zealand, 92 to 97%. Again, not that common, but they still happen. And then you have Canada at 99.5 to 99.8% of the time, MPs are voting with their party. That is a drastic difference. And in most of those cases, sure, you'll get the odd person that votes against their party and what they're voting for or voting against. But in most cases, it's going to be people abstaining. Because one of the things that is relatively common in Canadian Parliament is if an MP doesn't support the party's position on a bill for moral reasons, or maybe religious reasons or something like that, they're allowed to abstain. They're not going to force them to try to vote for something that is against their conscience or against one of their core moral values. That accounts for that 0.5 to 0.2%. But for almost every single other case, MPs are voting with their party. So that means their party says, here's a bill or here's an issue. This is our stance on it. Everyone's voting for it. That's called party discipline. Now, you don't have to take our word for it. You don't even have to take the stats words for it. There are articles about this published all over the world that talk about the type of party discipline that is actually in Canadian politics. Party unity and discipline in Canadian politics. Lost on division, party unity in the Canadian Parliament. Jean-Francois Godbout, Toronto, University of Toronto Press, 2020. Anyone with a passing understanding of Canadian politics is aware of the stubborn presence of party discipline in the parliamentary system. It is not a phenomenon that has been left to the stuffy corners of the ivory tower. Political actors and the media have complained about party discipline for decades. Reforms have been proposed. Party leaders have proposed new ways forward. As a central trait of Canadian Parliament, party discipline has driven away voters. It has even inspired the development of new political parties. So that's one article. And it's saying that this is nothing new. For decades, people have known that party discipline is paramount in Canadian politics. And that usually means that for any member of Parliament that is registered with a party, you typically know how they're going to vote if the party takes a position on something. But let's continue. Many observers of the Canadian House of Commons in the 21st century have noted its incredibly high party discipline. Few MPs choose to vote against their party's official stance on any given piece of legislation. Between 2011 and 2013, the first 2 years of the 41st Parliament, following the 2011 Canadian federal election, the elected members of the governing Conservative Party voted as a unified group on 76% of all votes, while members of the Liberal Party did so on 90% of all votes. And the members of the New Democratic Party did so on 100% of votes. This unity further increased in subsequent years, as in the 42nd Parliament following the 2015 election, the governing Liberal MPs voted identically on 99.6% of all votes, Conservative MPs on 99.5% of votes, and NDP MPs on 99.8% of votes. Thanks to strong party discipline, it is uncommon to see politicians who are otherwise affiliated with any of the main political parties act independently of their party. So what does this all mean? Well, what it means is that the narrative of when you go up to the ballot box and you say, I'm voting for the person and not the party, that narrative, frankly, falls on its face. Because the stats, politicians, political science majors, and academics around the world understand that in Canada's parliamentary system, party rules. It's very rare where you have people voting against the party because of the party discipline that is demanded in our parliamentary democracy. And it's mainly that way because we don't really have coalitions. Australia has coalitions, New Zealand has coalitions, the UK has coalitions. We don't have coalition governments here. It's exceedingly rare. Therefore, comes all down to parliamentary discipline and party discipline. And you don't even have to look there. We have 338 Canada and sites like that. Keep track of polls and support. And if you want any proof, go to any riding where there is not a confirmed candidate for one of the parties, and you will still see vote intention for that party. How could there be vote intention if you don't know who the candidate is? If it's solely based on the person, then the pollsters, when they're asking, well, so you live in a Conservative MP riding, who are you going to vote for in the next election? What's your vote intention? Well, I normally vote Liberal, but I can't tell you I'm going to vote Liberal because I don't know who it's going to be because I vote for the person and not the party. That's not how this works. And when you really get down to it, when you're having discussions with these people online, share some of this stuff with them and the differences between the Canadian parliamentary democracies and the UK and the rest of the Commonwealth. And you can have that discussion with them. And as you're having that discussion, you can ask them, did you vote in your municipal election? Did you vote in the provincial election? Really? What was the name of the politician that you voted for? And in many cases, the people that you're talking to will have no clue on what you're talking about. And what does this all come down to? This comes down to the fact that Canadians have a reasonable expectation that when they vote for somebody who belongs to a party, that that person is going to stay with that party, that that person is going to remain with that party and vote along with that party. It's a reasonable expectation because That is what the precedent and convention has borne out over decades, according to these academic journals. So, the backlash against these floor crossers is completely justified, and it would be equally justified if a liberal left the Liberals and went to the Bloc, or to the NDP, or tried to go to the Conservatives. And our stance here at Northern Perspective, we would be equally as disgusted with that MP as we are with the Conservative MPs. And I would even argue that there is grounds to even say an MP crossing the floor could be a breach of your Charter 3 rights, because if you're voting for that person to represent you, and then they went to the House of Commons, your vote was based on the fact that you voted for them, but also the party platform that they supported. So when that MP chooses to cross the floor, didn't consult you, didn't consult really anybody, despite the fact that they all say that they do, and then they join another party whose platform completely is different from the one that you voted for, and the party is completely different from the one that you voted for, I would argue that that breaches your right to representation. And I'm not a constitutional scholar, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so, I may be completely incorrect on that. But in my opinion, Canadians should have the expectation that the person that they're voting for, if elected, is going to serve in the job that you sent them to Ottawa to do, in the party that you sent them to represent. And I'm sorry, but any argument otherwise doesn't hold water at all. And because of that, this is why we're losing trust in our institutions in Canada, and why Canadians are increasingly saying, what's the point of voting when the person can just get up and walk across the floor? This isn't the Stanley Cup playoffs where it's, well, you just have to get in and then anything can happen. This is our democracy. This is Parliament. And this is how we need to maintain the trust of our voters in our parliamentary system. And we need new laws to protect the rights of voters, to ensure that when you cast your vote, you know exactly what you're going to get.